Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. The Conservative Party of Canada is leading big in the polls, and today they meet in Quebec for a convention for 3 days to discuss policies. What do you think of the party's lead, and what are the issues you want them to speak on? After 12:30, Bank of Canada Governor Tiff Macklem is speaking to reporters in about half an hour from now. We'll take you there live. Plus, are kids' sports becoming too expensive? We'll take your calls. Love to hear from you on that. I'm Michelle Eliot. Welcome to BC Today. Thank you for joining us on CBC Radio 1 and live streaming on CBC Gem, cbc.ca/BC, and on the CBC Vancouver YouTube page. Well, the Conservative Party is gathering for 3 days starting today for a policy convention. The party and its leader, Pierre Poilievre, are coming to this convention riding high in public opinion polls. Poilievre has been focused on affordability and criticism of the Liberal government on that file. Some members, though, are also putting forward issues around gender identity and drug decriminalization. We'll take your calls in a moment, and we'll ask you, what do you think of the Conservative lead in public opinion polls? What do you want to hear from this convention? And what are the top issues you want politicians to address? You can call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, and you can also hit pound 690 on your cell phone. You can also email bctoday@cbc.ca. We'll get to your calls in just a moment. But first, for some of the details of this convention, we're joined by the CBC's Catherine Cullen, host of CBC Radio's The House and a senior reporter on Parliament Hill. Catherine, good afternoon. Welcome back to the show.
Hello, happy to be back.
Well, what's happening at this convention?
Yeah, I mean, it is fundamentally a policy convention, right? It's about 2,000 people, 2,000 Conservative Party members who are descending on Quebec City. And these are, the keeners in your high school class. And I talk as like a political keener myself.
The biggest keener
excited.
of all, yeah.
But these are the people who really care about what party policy looks like. So you talked about some of the range of issues there. I mean, certainly there are social issues that they're going to discuss at this convention. There are policy proposals about China, about carbon tax, you name it, health, justice, runs the gamut. And a lot of these people are really passionate about specific policy proposals, ways that they want to change the Conservative Party's approach, and ways that fundamentally they hope they can change Canada's approach on a whole myriad of issues. Now, that is the stated intention of a policy convention, and that is going to be a big part of this, but they're also a really nice big national platform for a party leader as well. You know, it's been a year since Pierre Poilievre became Conservative Party leader. He did so in an absolute landslide. He really hasn't had quite as big a national stage in the sense of having all sorts of eyeballs focused on him at one time as he will tomorrow evening when he gives his speech to, yes, the party faithful, but of course it will be carried by media outlets across the country. This is a real opportunity for him to make a case to Canadians. I wouldn't expect radical change from the kinds of message we've been hearing over the course of the last year, because as you said, he's riding high in the polls. The message is working, and we know a big part of Pierre Poilievre's ethos is message discipline. Keep saying the same thing over and over and over to make sure that people are hearing it. But it is that mix. It's that mix of like sort of a party infomercial on the one hand, and actually like getting your hands a little bit dirty on some policy issues that people are really passionate about.
Okay, what is it do you think that has been resonating with people then?
Well, I do think the people around Pierre Poilievre would say that what has been resonating is the laser focus on housing and affordability issues. Even before his win, certainly, over the course of his whole leadership campaign, he was out there talking about people who are building houses but can't afford to live in them. We have really seen over the course of that time, since he began talking about that, how much those issues have come home to roost. You think back to March, record levels of food bank usage that we saw in Canada, never seen before. Vancouver, British Columbia, you know a thing or two about housing crises.
Yes, or three or four, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But it is something that is being felt across the country in community after community. And of course, even in places where they're familiar with it, the situation is getting even worse. Mr. Poilievre would also point to issues like crime, safe streets as being things that Canadians are concerned about. But fundamentally, I think what has worked for him is consistency and correctly identifying the issues that have really come to seize people, which is, do I have a place to live? You know, am I gonna lose my home because I can't pay my mortgage? Am I gonna get rent evicted from my home? And can I afford to put food on the table?
And so you mentioned this is like a big infomercial for the party. You know, what do you expect will come out of this after the 3 days?
Well, I will say if Pierre Poilievre and his team have their way, very little. I actually had one of his advisors say to me, you know, our conventions are always tame and boring. Maybe this is going to be the most tame and boring one of all. Now, I will fact check that a little bit. I'm not so sure that that's true. In fact, inevitably, leaders want to stay focused on their message, right? And in this case, as it long has been with the Conservative Party, it's an economic message. But there are other factions in the party that are interested in ranges of issues. For instance, one that's been getting a lot of attention around this convention is what stance the party is going to take on issues around trans children and whether or not they would ban access to both sex change surgeries, but also, medical care. Like I can find the exact language here, but essentially prohibiting life-altering medicinal or surgical interventions to minors under 18 to treat gender confusion or dysphoria. So that is one of the resolutions that is going to be debated. Those kinds of social issues, that's not fundamentally what Pierre Poilievre wants to fight the next election on. The people around him do not believe that these are the issues that are going to change people's minds. Now, the other side of the coin is, of course, Conservatives aren't the only political game in town. The Liberals have long made a big part of their political approach, particularly when election time comes around, to point to some of these social issues that Conservative Party members have debated and said, do you really think, Canadians, that you can trust where this party is going to go on issues such as abortion? And we might say things like LGBTQ plus rights as well. So again, for the Poilievre people, they hope that, frankly, this isn't all that interesting. But the party members have a range of concerns, and they are going to try to see if they can get some changes made to party policy on these issues. They start by debating all these policies in breakout rooms. Those are closed to the media, and only a handful of the policies actually make it onto the main convention floor. So the party, apparatus does have a bit of an ability there if they sort of stack these rooms to keep some of the issues from making themselves the principal headline, let's say, of this convention.
And Poilievre has been asked about the more social issues heading into this convention, and his response was, I'd rather let the members review the motions and propose what policy they want me to consider. Leaders are never bound by convention resolutions, but we do take them into consideration. So that quote from Pierre Poilievre. Catherine, always good to speak with you. Thank you so much.
Happy to do it. Have a great day.
You too. Catherine Cullen, host of CBC Radio's The House and a senior reporter on Parliament Hill. And Catherine will be at the convention tomorrow. You can listen to this week's episode of The House on CBC Radio 1 this weekend for more analysis. It's just about 1:15 here on BC Today, and we want to hear from you. What do you think of the Conservatives' big lead in the public opinion polls? What do you want to hear from this convention? And what are the big issues you want politicians to address? You can give us a call, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can also hit pound 690 on your cell phone, or you can email us, bctoday@cbc.ca. Joining us for more now is Hamish Telford. He's an associate professor of political science at the University of the Fraser Valley. Hamish, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us.
You're welcome, Michelle. Good to be with you.
Well, what are your thoughts as the Conservative Party heads into this policy convention for the next 3 days?
As Catherine said, the Conservatives have a lot of wind in their sails right now. Pierre Poilievre has had a good summer. His standing in the polls has gone up while Justin Trudeau's has gone down. So for the party, they want to continue that momentum. They don't want anything to come up at this convention that derails the momentum that they have built up over the summer. And there are some potential pitfalls there, as Catherine was discussing, around particularly LGBTQ rights, but probably some other social issues. The Conservatives have been here before, and their last policy convention, I believe it was, they rejected a motion saying that climate change was real. And that caused the party problems. Now, the leader's not bound by any of these resolutions. This is an opportunity for the membership to tell the leadership what they would like to see in the platform. They're not bound by these. And Aaron O'Toole promptly dismissed the failure of that resolution and produced a climate change policy of his own. But it dogged him for his entire time as leader and through the election campaign. And that's exactly what Pierre Poilievre wants to avoid this weekend.
Okay. And we're taking calls, obviously, on this as well. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. And now on the polling leading into this convention, Hamish, today, Angus Reid came out with a poll that the CBC has a 12-point edge in BC. So they broke it down by region, and I want to focus on BC now, while the Liberals are down by 4 points since last year in this province. And this was an online survey, and for comparison purposes, a same-size sample would carry a margin of error of plus or minus 1.5 percentage points 19 times out of 20. Now, I asked Catherine this as well, but what do you think is resonating specifically in BC when it comes to what they're hearing from Pierre Poilievre?
I think obviously cost of living is huge for Canadians everywhere. And the price of housing in particular is acute in BC, particularly the lower mainland here, southern Vancouver Island, but increasingly in places in the interior like Kelowna and Kamloops and so on and so forth. Mortgage rates have gone up considerably. So if you're getting into the housing market, it's tougher to get a mortgage with these high rates, or if you've had to renew a mortgage at these very high rates, you've really been hit hard. Of course, people are being hit hard when they're shopping for their groceries and other items they need for their daily lives and necessities. So I think that's really top of issue for many British Columbians, as it is for Canadians everywhere. And this has been Pierre Poilievre's focus. And whether Pierre Poilievre has gone up in the opinion polls because he's saying the right things or Justin Trudeau is perceived to be doing the wrong things is not clear to me yet.
Let's read some emails now. We're getting some emails to BC Today at cbc.ca. My guest is Hamish Telford with the University of the Fraser Valley. And Anne is asking, I'd like to know what they would do about inequality. Would they tax the rich? What have you seen or heard from the Conservatives or seen in the policy proposals, the motions being put forward at the convention that addresses that?
Well, we'll have to see what comes out of the convention. Typically, Conservatives are in favor of reducing taxes. Pierre Poilievre has campaigned pretty hard on canceling the carbon tax. That has resonated in particular in Atlantic Canada. We've long had a carbon tax in British Columbia, and we seem to have grown accustomed to it. But the maritime provinces got hit hard by the carbon tax coming online this year for them, with a steep increase in the price of gasoline for their cars and home heating oil for their homes. And that is one area where Pierre Poilievre has said that he will act, and I'm sure people would appreciate the reduction of taxes. What he has not put forward yet is a clear strategy to deal with climate change. So that would be the trade-off in that policy decision that they've already taken.
We have a caller who would like to talk about that issue right now. Tasha is joining us as we ask you what you think of the Conservatives' lead in the polls, and what do you want to hear from this policy convention that starts today, a 3-day convention in Quebec City, and what are the big issues you want politicians to address? Our numbers again, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, pound 690 on your cell phone as well. And Tasha, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks. I'm very worried about this Pierre Poilievre. I think he's divisive and mean-spirited, and, he's shown that over all the years that he's been a member of Parliament and Harper's government and now as leader. I agree with Hamish. They don't say a word about climate change, and they don't seem to pay any mind to the fact that the country and most of the world has been burning up or, being flooded or hurricanes or whatever all summer, and this will continue. So that's one glaring gap. I'm a very progressive person. I like the current government. I like the Prime Minister, but I think the Prime Minister should step down, and sooner than later, so that the Liberals have time to get a new leader in place like Mark Miller. I think he's got a lot of heart. I think he's a good communicator, or Anita Anand, and that would blow everything that Pierre Poilievre says about Trudeau right out the window. I think they need a chance, because otherwise I'm fearful that in 2025 we're going to have a very mean-spirited, divisive government in place. And finally, polls are polls. You know, they're a snapshot in time. Nick Nanos has polls that show the Liberals still in contention. So, you know, I don't know. I take it with a grain of salt. And I wish they'd call me because I'd vote Liberal. Thanks.
Tasha, thank you very much for the call. Let's go back to Hamish Telford on that. She spoke about climate change, her concerns around that, and her concerns about Pierre Poilievre. Now, in terms of the polls, he's been showing an increase in popularity as well. So what are you hearing in terms of how the public is feeling about him?
She's absolutely right that Pierre Poilievre, you have to remember, is a career politician. He was first elected to Parliament when he was 24. This is really the only job he's had since he left university. And he made his mark in the Harper government as Stephen Harper's attack dog. He had a role to fill, and he filled it to the T. He seemed to be very comfortable in that role. And of course, we want a prime minister who's resolute. But I think also, Canadians don't want necessarily an attack dog, a pit bull for prime minister. So we've seen Pierre Poilievre and the party make a concerted effort to soften his image. He's changed his look a little bit. He's not being wearing suit and ties all the time. Often we just see him in a t-shirt and blazer. He's ditched the glasses. He's looking tanned, looking relaxed. We've seen some commercials airing on television and online, which portray him as a happy family man with a lovely wife and beautiful children. So he's really been trying to soften his image, get away from his attack dog reputation. What his true nature is, I'm sure he is a good family man, but his instincts as a politician do seem to be attack mode, and we will see if this softening of his image works. On the climate issue, the party this has been the party's Achilles heel ever since Stephen Harper was prime minister and since he's left. What's working for the party at the moment is that when the economy is difficult, people are less concerned about the environment. And as the economy improves, they get more concerned about environmental issues. So with the economy having the great difficulties that it's in at the moment with inflation and mortgage rates and so on and so forth, that is what's preoccupying people's minds. And they've put the environment on the back burner. I say that perhaps that's not the right metaphor given what's happened this summer, but it's not top of mind for people at the moment. Of course, if the economy starts to improve, as we all hope it will, perhaps that will come back to the foremost of their concerns.
Let's take another call now. Rod is joining us from Vancouver. Hi, Rod. Welcome to the show.
Oh, hi. Thanks very much. So, yes, I'm interested in hearing about Pierre's defunding the CBC, which I think is, I've always had an issue with national federal parties funding the broadcast media. So I think that's a good idea. Defund the CBC, which by and large is a voice of the Liberal Party.
The CBC is independent, right? The CBC is a public broadcaster.
Well, it receives billions of dollars annually from the federal government, and Poilievre has said categorically that he's going to stop that funding for the very reasons I've described, that it becomes a voice of the government. You can't receive funding and not support the funding body that's putting food in your mouth, right? That's the bottom line with regards to media. I'm also very, very supportive of Poilievre's position in terms of protecting children under the age of 18, and that means banning castration drugs, which are used for sex offenders, which they call puberty blockers, but indeed it's the exact same drug they give offenders. And I don't believe any child under 18 is in a position to make a decision about their gender when they're not allowed to smoke, drink, vote, etc. So that's a very, very clear policy about protecting children. And
Rod, thank you very much, Rod. Now, those are those social issues that we heard about earlier, right? So Hamish, he's saying that he supports some of these motions that are going forward. What do you think of that? I just want to quote as well from the Canadian Psychological Association when it comes to gender diversity. Mental health professions perpetuate gatekeeping practices and pathological views on gender diversity by asserting the false notion that gender diverse people need to show clinically significant distress or gender dysphoria in order to qualify for gender affirming medical care. Gender diverse people's distress stems largely from social injustices, cisnormative discrimination and violence rather than from gender diversity itself. So that's from the Canadian Psychological Association, just to provide their point of view when it comes to gender affirming surgery. So that point from them. But just want to get into that. These are the discussions that are going to be had at this convention.
Sure. We're sort of in a very interesting sociological moment. We have seen an LGBTQ movement where people have finally been able to come out and express their own gender identities and sexual preferences. And we're seeing a backlash to that movement. It's being particularly prevalent in the United States, and we've seen state governments take steps to restrict particularly trans rights. And we're starting to see that creep into Canada. There have been discussions in New Brunswick and Saskatchewan, both with conservative governments, around these sorts of issues with children and gender dysphoria and how their pronouns are referred to in schools. So there are obviously a lot of people in Canada that seem to have these sorts of concerns, and they typically gravitate to the Conservative Party. And indeed, there are motions coming forward at the convention on these issues. And the last caller, Rod, I believe his name was, would be seemingly one of the supporters of such a motion. So it animates a certain segment of the Conservative Party base, but it doesn't animate a majority of Canadians. And in fact, I would suggest that it alienates a significant number of Canadians. And it would alienate, in particular, the sorts of voters the Conservatives need in order to win government, younger, more progressive voters who live in the urban areas. If the Conservatives really boils down to Toronto and its suburbs, the Conservatives have to do better in that region if they want to win the next election. And a focus on gender identity issues is not going to help them in that region at all. So, and Pierre Poilievre and his team are well aware of that, and that's why they want to tamp down these motions and at the convention to the best of their abilities.
Let's take one more call here now. Tim is joining us from Kamloops. Hi, Tim. Welcome to the show.
Hi there. Yeah, just 2 years, it's an eternity, right? Because it's the 25 and when the mandate's over, right? But here's the thing. What I'm interested in is whether or not Pierre Poilievre, who has a gold-plated dental plan, whether he's critical of the NDP Liberal agreement on the dental care for children and seniors. Well, I've heard somebody say that maybe somebody should challenge him and his Conservative caucus to forego the dental plan for 2 years and pay for him and his family out of pocket, because he's right now sounds like he's trying to be Tommy Douglas, like the working guy, and maybe he's going to, if he gets in, rule like Mike Harris, because he keeps using that phrase common sense, but maybe he should do that without having his gold-plated dental plan and all his Conservative colleagues. And it'll be interesting to see what happens with him and Doug Ford. Is he along the same lines of developing the Greenbelt for housing and developer connections there? It'll be interesting. But again, we're in 2 years, so there's a long time to go.
Okay, so you're comparing the image of the working guy with, I guess, you're using a dental plan as representative of perhaps not fitting that image in life. Tim, thank you very much. What do you make of that seeming contradiction that Tim is bringing up, Hamish?
Well, this is always a difficulty for politicians. They do get paid relatively well compared to other Canadians. Pierre Poilievre has a government-supplied house as well as a good benefit program and a nice pension program as well. But I think that they can have those benefits and continue to campaign on the sorts of issues that concern most Canadians. And it doesn't necessarily raise the issue of hypocrisy. But I take, I think it was Tim's bigger point that the election is 2 years away. And that's an eternity in terms of politics. The economy, we hope, will be in a very different place by then. It's conceivable, of course, that Justin Trudeau won't be the leader of the Liberal Party in 2 years' time. He says he will, but he has to say that until he decides that he can't carry on. So a lot can change between now and the next election.
Hamish, thank you very much for this, and we'll look to see what comes from the convention in 3 days from now. Thanks for your time.
You're welcome, Michelle.
Hamish Telford is an associate professor of political science at the University of the Fraser Valley. It's 12:31, 1:31 now in the Mountain Time Zone. You're with BC Today here on CBC. And coming up in our next half hour, the Bank of Canada Governor Tiff Macklem is scheduled to take questions from reporters in a couple of minutes from now at 12:30, in fact, Pacific time. We're going to keep an eye on that and take you there live as it begins. And as well, back to school also means back to youth sports and after-school activities. But how much of a hurdle is the cost of playing youth sports? We're going to take your calls on that. That's coming up after this CBC News Update with Robert Zimmerman.
Good afternoon. A baby has died after being struck by a vehicle in a Kamloops driveway. Police say the 1-year-old was rushed to hospital shortly before 5 o'clock last night. Kamloops RCMP are asking any witnesses to reach out. The Fraser Valley Regional District says 27 properties, including 6 homes, were destroyed by a wildfire in the Fraser Canyon. It has been burning for almost 2 months between Lytton and Boston Bar. It was whipped by strong winds in August and has grown to 180 square kilometers. Meanwhile, Ottawa has committed $32 million to BC over the next 5 years to help the province fight fires. Part of the money will go to training community-based firefighters and specialized firefighting equipment. Other investments include fleet vehicles, fire camp infrastructure, and water delivery systems. And now the forecast on the North Coast, a mix of sun and cloud this afternoon with a high of 16. Highs up to 18 with smoke and sunshine in the Peace. In the central interior, mainly cloudy with local smoke and a high of 17 degrees. Highs in the mid-20s and mainly sunny in the Kootenays. In the southern interior, sunny with a high of 25. And for Metro Vancouver, Greater Victoria, and the Fraser Valley, a mix of sun and cloud this afternoon with highs reaching 21 degrees. I'll have more local news at the top of the hour. Now back to Michelle with BC Today.
Yeah, I see you're wearing a sweater there.
It's kind of a light sweater.
Yeah, light sweater. It was colder this morning. I ran into one of our colleagues who was wearing a heavier sweater. She said, I'm so hot. But of course, the day started out quite a lot cooler. So we're in that period, right?
We sort of, yes. I don't know what to wear. I know it's white, so you're not supposed to wear white after Labor Day.
Labor Day.
That's why I'm wearing it. But yeah,
there
it's
you
hard
go.
to know.
Breaking all the rules, Rob.
It's true. It is sunny now.
Thanks so much,
Sure.
Robert Zimmerman in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. Bank of Canada Governor Tiff Macklem is speaking to reporters right now. Let's take you there live.
Journalistes qui sont dans la salle aujourd'hui, avant de passer aux journalistes qui participent par téléconférence, avant de poser une question, prière de vous identifier. Je vous demanderai également d'utiliser le micro sans fil. Libre à vous de poser vos questions dans la langue officielle de votre choix. So we'll start taking questions.
Hi, my name is Robert Tuttle from Bloomberg News. My question is, given your institution's relationship with Canada's finance minister, is it appropriate for Freeland to be characterizing your decision to hold rates steady on Wednesday as a, quote, welcome relief?
Look, the Deputy Prime Minister and other elected officials around the country, they're hearing from their constituents. And I think, they're hearing what we're hearing. We're hearing directly from Canadians that high inflation is hurting them. And they're hearing that the increases in our policy rates certainly squeezing some Canadians and making life even more difficult. I think you've seen elected officials around the country express that. Look, unfortunately, there is no pain-free way to restore price stability. The destination is worth it. We don't want to make it any more difficult than it has to be. But we do require higher interest rates to lower inflation. If we hadn't raised interest rates, inflation would be a much bigger problem. Monetary policy is working. As I highlighted in my remarks, we're not there yet, but the target's in sight. We need to stay the course. The Bank of Canada is set up to be operationally independent. There are good reasons for that, and that operational independence, it's more important when the decisions are difficult. The decisions are difficult. I am confident that the Bank of Canada remains independent. We have a clear mandate. Canadians expect us to control inflation, and that's what we're doing.
Hi, Sean Polzer, Western Standard. In your remarks in the room, you said the impact of the carbon tax was about, 0.15% on inflation. I'm just wondering how you arrive at that number and whether that gets factored in through not just energy costs, but all the inputs, because obviously there's a lot of inputs in agriculture and manufacturing.
It's a good question, and we can take this offline if you want. But yes, that is the direct impact on the components that are most directly affected. It does not include any second round effects.
And is the economy going to absorb it, given that the carbon tax is going to essentially triple between now and 2030?
So the carbon tax, the announcements have it going up. As I said, our estimate is that increases inflation each year by 1.15%. So inflation's measured over 12 months. So yes, each year it's 0.15, but that's a relatively small effect on year-over-year inflation.
Anis Hidari, CBC. You have mentioned that so far you've been able to cool demand. We've been able to cool demand in the economy without unemployment spiking. We've got jobs numbers coming out tomorrow. Are you expecting that to continue? What are you hoping to see out of the jobs numbers tomorrow?
Well, look, I'm not gonna hazard a forecast on the job number tomorrow, but I will say what we're expecting to see. We have what have we seen? We have seen a gradual easing in the labor market. And you can see that in a number of statistics. The vacancy rate has come down. It's taken some time, but it's now come down quite a bit. The employment growth has still been certainly positive. Employment's still been growing, but it's been growing less than population growth. So what that suggests is that the sort of supply of workers is growing more than the demand for workers. So supply is catching up with demand, and those pressures are easing. So we expect to see continuation of that trend. We expect to see, for a period, employment growth continue below population growth. Certainly, we've seen easing in the labor market, but there are still labor shortages. Labor market is still somewhat tight.
Dylan Short with allsaskatchewan.com. In the past, we've seen when there's been pauses.
You've been listening to the Bank of Canada Governor Tiff Macklem taking questions from reporters and speaking about interest rate hikes. Yesterday, the Bank of Canada opted to hold its key interest rate at 5%. Ahead of that decision, premiers of BC, Ontario, and Newfoundland and Labrador individually sent letters asking the Bank of Canada to stop hiking interest rates. And what he had to say today, with regard to rate hikes, he said the end is in sight, but we're not there yet. We need to stay the course. Macklem also said he understands pain is being felt across the country, but he said the destination is worth it. We do require higher interest rates, he said. With the inflation, without them, inflation would be a bigger problem without those higher rates. He also spoke about the independence of the Bank of Canada in light of those comments from politicians. And he's continuing to speak now to reporters in Calgary. And we'll have more for you throughout the day here on CBC. You can also check our website. That is cbc.ca/BC. It's now 12:40, 1:40 in the Mountain Time Zone. This is BC Today here on CBC Radio 1, live streaming too on YouTube. CBC Vancouver is where you can find us, and online on our website, cbc.ca/BC. You could also use the CBC Gem app. I'm Michelle Eliot. Very nice to be with you this afternoon. Well, now we're going to talk about kids and sports. Yes, kids and youth, they're getting back into the swing of things with after-school and extracurricular sports. But the cost of playing sports like soccer, hockey, rugby, basketball, and others is getting increasingly out of reach. Whether it's registration fees or equipment or travel for games, the expenses can add up. And the financial barriers can keep children from getting involved. Kids Sport is an organization that helps out with some of those expenses, and they are seeing a big increase in applications. We'll hear from them in a moment. And we are asking you, how expensive have sports become for you and your family? How valuable are sports for youth? And what do they get out of participating in sports? You can give us a call, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can also hit pound 690 on your cell phone. By email, we are bctoday@cbc.ca. And my guest is Angela Crowther, Director of Kids Sport BC. And she joins me here in studio. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thanks so much for joining us and being here. First, can you give us a sense of just how expensive sports have become?
Yeah, I think many families are struggling with the cost of sport. You know, sport organizations have increasing costs themselves that they need to cover. And so for a lot of families, it's getting to be something that's out of reach. And sport tends to be one of those extras, I think, that families look at. You know, it's not like food on the table or school supplies that kids are really in need of. But I think the benefits make it worthwhile. And it's something that, you know, Kids Sport's here to help with some of those expenses for families that need it.
And why do you think that perception of, you know, this is a nice to have, not a must have when it comes to priorities? What makes you see sports as valuable? Why should kids be involved? What do they get out of it?
Yeah, I think there's a ton of benefits to sport. I know I played sports growing up my whole life. My kids are really active in sport now. And for a lot of families, I think first and foremost, it just creates that sense of community. You know, it brings people together. There's a lot of social aspects, not only for the kids, but for the parents that are involved. You know, it goes without saying the physical benefits for their physical health, but also there's a lot of benefits for mental health as well. And just building that confidence. You know, I can see it in my own kids and the kids that I help coach, building confidence, developing those friendships, leadership skills. There's, you know, the list goes on and on. There's, I think, a lot to be gained from being involved in sport.
Yeah, I see that in my kids. They are in swimming and basketball. They do bowling. My daughter does bowling as well. And there's just something to be said for that activity and that sense of participation in a group, for sure. But there are financial barriers, as you've just been saying, and you're seeing that from your point of view. You provide grants to help cover costs of registration and equipment. What is the need out there?
Yeah, that's right. Kids Sport is here for families that do have financial barriers to sport. So we provide grants, typically around $400. That can vary depending on the community you live in. But we help to cover the cost of sport registration fees for kids. And so we're seeing a lot of families, you know, a lot of new families that are applying for our support. They register their child in a sport and then they apply to their local Kids Sport chapter for funding. And that funding goes towards the sport club to help pay for that sport registration fee. And we're seeing a huge increase in grant applications this fall and compared to previous years. You know, some of our applications, in particular for our provincial fund, which funds kids in communities where there aren't a Kids Sport chapter, we're seeing upwards of 80% more applications this year from families. And I think it's related to things like interest rates that are going up and inflation. You know, all of those things, they're factors for families, and a lot of families are still struggling, I think, post-pandemic.
Right. And are these more rural communities that where the need is greater?
It tends to be, but you know, we do have chapters throughout the Lower Mainland, and a lot of families, a lot of them are reporting that their applications are up as well.
Yeah. Are you able to meet the need?
I mean, right now, in the immediate future, we're able to kind of keep up with what we've been seeing. We've been lucky to have support from a number of really generous organizations. We've received some support through the provincial government, but obviously, at the rate that we're seeing applications, I don't know that that's going to last a long time. And And our grant amount has been pretty stagnant for a number of years, and so more financial support that we receive could mean that we could provide even more to the families that are in need.
Okay. My guest is Angela Crowther, the director of Kids Sport BC. As you just heard, they are seeing an increase in the number of families applying for grants to help pay for sports registration fees and equipment, given the rising costs. And so we're asking you, how expensive have sports been for you and your family? Perhaps as your kids were growing up or as you were growing up, you saw those costs rise. How did you manage? And how important are sports to youth as they grow up? What do you think is valuable about that experience? We'd love to hear from you. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, and you can hit pound 690 as well by email, bctoday@cbc.ca. And what about for what in terms of other options, right? It doesn't have to be hockey or soccer, the big ones that I can think of. What are some other less costly alternatives, perhaps, that parents and families can look to?
Yeah, there's a range of sports. So Kids Sport, we fund sports that are affiliated with members of our Sport BC community. So yeah, it is sports like hockey and soccer. Soccer happens to be our most funded sport.
Is that right?
But there are some more accessible ones like BC School Sports. So the sports that are offered through schools are covered through Kids Sport. And everything, you mentioned your daughter plays bowls. So, bowling, everything, anything you can kind of think of. Different martial arts are included as well under Kids Sport. So there's a variety and something really for everyone.
Okay. Is pickleball one of the sports you cover? We've been talking a lot about pickleball and its popularity.
Pickleball is a relatively new member of Sport BC. I don't know how many youth programs they have, but I'm sure that will become more popular over
There you
the
go.
years.
My son has actually been playing pickleball over the course of the summer, just at the local court, and he loves it. And what about school sports, though? You mentioned them as an alternative, but are there other barriers in terms of, you have to try out and only a certain number of kids can play?
Yeah, school sports can get really competitive. I think, a lot of times there are, especially in the larger schools where, it is a lot of the club players that are making those school sports, but it also tends to be a really accessible way for kids to get involved. There's a little bit less travel sometimes, and it does, there are options for lower cost for families to get involved with school sports.
Okay. And what about for, my daughter has a disability. What about for kids with complex needs? What are some accessibility options that you provide?
Yeah, I think a lot of sport clubs are offering adaptive programming these days, but there's also a number of members sport clubs that are part of Sport BC. And so when we think about, BC Blind and Deaf Sports, BC Wheelchair Basketball, BC Adaptive Snow Sports. There's a lot of options out there for families who have those unique needs.
Okay, so looking for those options as well, because there are many challenges when it comes to trying to access those activities. We have a call on the line as well, but also Sheena writes us, sports are much too expensive and low-income families are particularly affected. If you have enough money, please sponsor an Indigenous child or a refugee child. Sheena, thank you very much. BC Today at cbc.ca as we talk about the rising cost of sports and how expensive has it been for you. What is the value of playing and participating in sports? Love to hear that as well. Dawn is joining us now from Coquitlam. Hi there, Dawn. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. What a great topic. To get quickly to the point, the question was, how important are sports to childhood development? I say it's essential. I think the arts are also essential to childhood development. They help to develop creative thinking, critical thinking, spatial awareness, body awareness. I think that access to sports is also another issue that, and what I mean by that is even in the schools, kids have limited access to play on teams other than through their gym classes.
Yeah, in schools, you mean, yeah.
Yeah, and so the giant schools do kids no favor that way. The smaller schools do. You also have I think the idea that sports, if you have, let me say this again, talent isn't about income levels. You have talent at all income levels, and there's a number of sports that do represent Canada and it's a pay to play. So, for instance, my son just came back and is on Team Canada Ultimate Frisbee.
Oh, wow.
They went to Nottingham, and every player had to pay somewhere between $5,000 and $7,000
to go.
Canada to go.
Okay.
And so I think there's also a problem there. I mean, we have lots of sponsorship for hockey and at that level, the juniors and what have you, but we don't have it at that level for other sports. And I think we have to broaden our scope of support. I've been involved in a number of fundraising efforts for kids to be able to play. And, we're in a fortunate situation that we could afford to pay our son's way. But recognize that a lot of the other kids who are very talented couldn't attend because they couldn't pay.
Yeah, you put it so well there, right? That the talent is not reflected in ability to pay. Dawn, I was going to ask you why you're so interested in this, and wow, congratulations to your son who made it to represent Team Canada. What can you say? We'll talk more about access to sports for sure, but in your son, what did you see was the difference? What was the spark in him that you saw from playing?
Well, if Ultimate Frisbee is an amazing sport, the values and principles in it are just so universal in the sense that it focuses on inclusivity and equity. The good players coach other players. They learn, it's a self-refereed sport, meaning there's no whistles on the field or referees on the field. So kids, when they start playing, my son started playing when he was in grade 6, they learn leadership skills, conflict resolution skills, communication skills, teamwork skills, because you can't win an ultimate game by yourself where you cannot run down the field with a disc. There is this whole sportsmanship aspect, meaning if I knock a player over, the expectation is I help them up and I make sure they're okay. There is what's called a spirit circle at the end of a game, and they give and receive feedback from each other and with the other team. So each team is giving each team feedback. So for him, it was a real, he just saw the fairness in it. And I'm a bit strict about fairness and equity. And so he just saw the fairness in it. He saw the equity in it.
Yeah.
And he's worked extremely hard, as have all the other players that made it to Team Canada. But it's this whole idea of we're representing the country, but we have to pay to represent the country on the world stage.
Dawn, what a great call. Thank you very much for that and sharing. All the best to your son. The cost, right? $5,000 to $7,000. But also interesting that everything she was talking about were benefits that come from being off the field. It was all, values and teamwork and conflict resolution. But what about that, sponsorship for the big, well-known sports, but for something like Ultimate Frisbee, everybody had to pay $5,000 to $7,000.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to be the more successful you are and the higher level you're playing at, the more expensive it is. And sometimes it does become a significant barrier, just because you don't have money doesn't mean that you don't have that talent, like she said. And that's where there are some other organizations through Sport BC. There's the BC Amateur Sport Fund, which a lot of clubs do have funding available for that more high performance aspect. And Kids Sport, we're trying to fill a gap mostly at that grassroots kind of entry level to get kids involved in sport. But it definitely is a challenge. The longer you continue and you're getting to those higher levels, it does become more expensive.
Sure. Randy is our next caller now in Vancouver. Hi, Randy. What's your experience with kids sports and expenses?
Hello, Michelle. Thanks for taking my call. I really agree with the previous caller, echo her sentiments, and your guest, agree with a lot of her comments. I grew up in Vancouver playing team sports. It was actually soccer over 50 years ago. And I see fields in this city that have not been touched for field sports, upgraded, maintained, anything. I just think my child plays soccer at quite a high level, competitive level, and we're actually driving, all over Metro Vancouver, and I would say hundreds and hundreds of parents every weekend to play a simple soccer game.
To find those fields that are playable.
That are playable and safe. that your child doesn't turn an ankle or hurt a knee.
Right.
And I just think Metro Vancouver, all of the mayors, but especially the new mayor in Vancouver, need to address this and start building fields and treating kids' sports. We could go on and on about the benefits of team sports as an essential part of child development. And I just think that the costs, even today, I heard that the Parks Board is contemplating a 6% increase on fees, which translates into all the programs and field user fees. And it's getting out of control. It's really getting out of control. And I just think that, people need to, there's a lot of soccer parents, there's a lot of Frisbee parents, there's a lot of parents of kids that are playing sports, need to email the city, whatever municipality they're in, and say, stop these user fees, because the city's becoming so unaffordable.
And that's another route when it comes to the fees that parents are facing. And his point there about the condition of fields as well. I don't know if that's something you can speak about when it comes to access or maintenance of facilities, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just a symptom of the pinch on everybody's expenses. There's a ton of expenses through the city, and they have to prioritize as well. Facilities are expensive to maintain, but obviously super important for our kids, and it does affect the long-term ability for sport clubs to continue in those areas.
Yeah. Well, that might also add to, I imagine, with Randy, to the cost, because then you have to travel. And I'm sure if you're driving a fuel driven vehicle, that's going to add to your cost as well. We have one last email here. Any push then? What can help in our last 30 seconds here? What can help sports organizations move forward?
Yeah, I think just trying to find a way, finding organizations like KidSport to help get your kids involved and continue that participation, because I think as we all work together and we commit to agreeing that sport is something that's really important for our youth, I think if everyone has that perspective, we'll find ways to make it work and make it a priority.
Okay, and I went for a hike yesterday. Maybe I take my kids out for a hike. There you go. There's our sport for the day. Thank you so much for your time. Victoria Wright says, my husband and I are in our early 30s. We're both transplants from Ontario, and our entire social network out west is based on the sports we grew up doing: skiing, mountain biking. We're hugely motivated to work hard now to ensure we can hopefully share the opportunities of participating in these sports with our kids, and these sports keep getting more expensive. Thank you so much for your email. And my thanks as well to Angela Crowther, the director of Kids Sport BC. Very nice to have you. That's it for our show today. Thanks so much to everyone who called in and joined the discussion. You can listen again on the CBC Listen app and watch us on demand on YouTube, CBC Vancouver. I'm Michelle Eliot. Have a great afternoon.